so in 1908, we had our first Mother's Day. Anna Jarvis, who started Mother's Day, her mother, Ann, was a peace activist that served on both sides of the Civil War in the United States, taking care of the wounded and dressing the wounds, and really served and gave herself for that whole thing, which really just kind of leads into the Bible story that we're going to share here in a few moments. If you've ever wondered, as I have, when you have written on the card, you got your mama card, you got your mama card, right? Okay. And on the front of the card, on the envelope, you write, Happy Mother's Day. Now, I don't know if you've ever gotten do you put the apostrophe before the S, or do you just, is it Mother's Day? Like, how many have wondered that? Raise your hand. 2 of us are nerds. All right, I'm just kind of curious. There's so much you can find out on the internet. So it is actually, it's singular possessive. It is apostrophe S, Happy Mother's Day. It's not Mother's Day, it's Mother's Day, my mother. So that's, so if you ever wondered about that whole thing. Coincidentally, this one is broadcast on TV and online. So in case my mom is watching, just in case she's ever watching, camera 2, let's go to camera 2. Because y'all want to do this, don't you? Hi, Mom! There you go. All right. So we're going to talk about Mother's Day a little bit today. Mothers are amazing, just amazing. Moms are amazing. I don't know, I look at my own mom, my own grandmother, the significant women in my life, sew on a button. How many men would be lost if you had to sew on a button? That'd be me. She could fix a toy. She could go outside and play some ball with you. She could do all kinds of stuff. Sometimes she was the counselor. She was the encourager. She was the shoulder upon which you could cry when your whole life crumbled and he broke up and she broke up and that whole kind of thing. Moms are just incredible. We love our moms. What can you say about moms? Moms, there is this thing called Piranha Hour. This is what I mean by Piranha Hour. Piranha Hour is like from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 7. So it's not an hour, it's 4 hours long. And I call it Piranha Hour because everybody wants a piece of mom, right? So all moms can relate to this. How many times in 4 hours do you hear this? Mom, where's my homework? Mom, what's for supper? Mom, she did it. Mom. It's just mom. And you just want to blow up and explode, right? And so what do moms do? They run to the one place where they will be left alone, the bathroom, and they lock the door. And then even while they're in the bathroom, regardless what they're doing in the bathroom, there's little tiny lips squeezing underneath the door going, Mom, what are you doing in there, right? So that's the way that whole thing goes. Moms, this beautiful woman that stands in the front of the church on the day of her wedding, all beautiful and just in this lace and just phenomenal. This amazing woman, this beauty queen. And then she becomes a mother. And as a mother, she'll rip open the back of the diaper and shove her nose in. Yeah, this needs changing. I don't know. It's not this. Anyway, just that whole kind of thing. It's just moms. Moms are amazing that way. They can look like a total wreck on Saturday and a model on Sunday morning when they're all dressed up and ready to go to church. Moms are just amazing, aren't they? There's a mom we're going to talk about in the Bible today. A mom who's a rather obscure mother. It's probably a Bible story that you've never heard before. Maybe never heard before. And this mom possesses some incredible characteristics and qualities. In fact, this mom's single action would influence a nation. This one mother would influence a nation. It's an amazing story. So if you want to know more about this mother, you can turn it's going to be a while before we get there. We're going to go to 2 Samuel, chapter 21 is where we're going to read this little story. If you want to follow along, we're just going to go one verse today. This is going to be a one-verse message to which you're thinking, that's awesome. Pastor Chris is only going to preach another 3 minutes, and he's done. We get the closing prayer, and we're going to get to the buffet line before the rest of Williston gets there, right? So, wrong. It's amazing how much a pastor can preach out of one verse. But what this one character does in the Bible for us is displays so many qualities that all of us could strive for. It's not a message about a mom just for moms. It's a message really for all of us here this morning. An obscure figure in the Bible, you'll probably never read about her. I think there are only 2 verses that mention her by name. We're going to read one of those verses in a few moments. This woman's name is Rizpah. R-I-Z-P-A-H, Rizpah. Nobody knows much about Rizpah. We don't know much about Rizpah. We know a lot about some of the Bible women. We know about Ruth. We know about Naomi. We know about Esther. We know about Mary, the mother of Jesus. There's some really incredible characters in Scripture for us. But Rizpah, we don't know much about Rizpah. Rizpah's name means a glowing coal. Rizpah, in the story that we're going to read, she becomes a concubine of Saul. Who's Saul? Saul becomes the first king of Israel. So we don't know really much about Rizpah's beginnings, but we would imagine that to be in the court of the king as a concubine to the king. And Rizpah was a beautiful woman. Can you imagine what it would be like to be a Rizpah? For wherever you grew up, whatever your background was, that suddenly your name was called. Rizpah. The king wants you in his court. He wants you to be a concubine. And so suddenly now you're elevated from just an absolute normal, plain, ordinary life to one of the king's concubines. Suddenly there's status and stature. There's power and there's influence. You have the ear of the king. She was a beautiful woman, and we don't really know her beginnings. And she comes into the kingdom of Saul as Saul comes in to power. She took on significance when she became a concubine. Can you imagine this? Well, whatever you're doing on Monday, and now suddenly it's Tuesday, and you're a concubine to the king. Privilege. I bet you her wardrobe changed. I'm sure she was pampered. I bet she was treated a little differently. I would imagine that when she walked into public, she was seen unlike she had been seen before. It's somewhere in the union to King Saul. Somewhere in this union, a son is born. And as we so often see in the Old Testament, when names were given, it could sometimes be little glimpses to what was going on in the life of the parents. So Saul, to the concubine Rizpah, has a son. His name is Araunah, and Araunah means belonging to the palace. I would imagine for this woman who grew up in normalcy in life, suddenly she has significance. I just birthed a child to the king. I belong to the palace. This is my home now. Things are solidified for me. Somewhere along the line, after Araunah is nursed and weaned, and she gives birth to a second son. His name is Mephibosheth. Ladies, if you're thinking of names for your child, Mephibosheth is a great name. It means one who destroys shame. Is that a little glimpse into maybe what she was feeling? We don't know her past. We don't know what she was struggling with, but she names her second son, one who destroys my shame. She was giving birth to royalty. Married to Saul. Saul, the very first king, we need to know a little bit more about Saul. She knew Saul when he was a man glowing with power from God, and a man who would one day become tormented and eventually rejected as king by God. Saul, you understand, Saul's beginnings were very humble beginnings. It was inauguration day, and Israel had been begging God for a king. We want a king like the surrounding nations. And while God was not in favor of that, he eventually granted their request. And so it's inauguration day, and Saul is the one who's been chosen to be the first king of Israel. The crowds are all gathered together for the pomp and the circumstance, and I would imagine somebody standing on the podium that day saying, ladies and gentlemen of Israel, I present to you our first king, King Saul. And the trumpets blasted, and there was fanfare. Nobody came to the pulpit. Nobody came to the podium. Awkwardly, maybe, again, the first king of Israel, Saul. Nobody comes to the podium. What an awkward moment that was. So somebody starts looking amongst the crowd and goes past the military bands that are there playing their songs, and they're looking for Saul, and Saul is hiding. He's hiding amongst the luggage of the people that were there to celebrate this great fanfare. And what a humble man. He was taller than everybody else, and I can imagine they dragged him up there to the podium to give his inauguration speech. That was Saul, the first king of Israel at the beginning. And this is the man that chooses Rizpah to be his concubine. Well, like most women that are close to the men, she sees the flaws. She knows Saul like the other ladies that would have been in his court saw Saul. He becomes a restless man, a man of anger, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. I would imagine that somewhere in the quietness of her time alone, she uttered something like this, he's just not the man that I married. There was a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Because an evil spirit from the Lord had been given to Saul to torment him. And it all started really at the very beginning of Saul's life. It was just the beginning of his leadership. There was conflict with Saul and this guy named David, this little upstart shepherd boy. One of the first things that Saul did as a leader, he goes out and he stands on a hill, and there's this valley before him, and on the other side another hill, and there's a Philistine army on that hill. For 40 days, Saul and his army walk back and forth on their hill, and the Philistines, they walk back and forth on their hill, taunting one another. And really the taunts all came from the Philistines because they had this guy named Goliath over there, the giant of the man. You all know that story, don't you? One day, David, this little shepherd boy, I would imagine maybe 16, 17, sent to check up on his brothers, comes out there, and you know the rest of the story, don't you? David has the sling and the stone and falls the giant, and boom, down he goes. There's a huge, huge victory. It's an amazing, amazing victory. The battle is over with, and Cadillac pulls up, and Saul and David get in the Cadillac, and they put the top down, and they sit on the back. You saw them maybe in the parade yesterday going down the street, and all the ladies are singing a song as they come down the street riding on the back of the Cadillac. Saul has killed his thousands. David has killed tens of thousands. And the word says that from that moment on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Oh, that's a story and a sermon in and of itself. Nonetheless, David, this young little upstart shepherd boy, really becomes a thorn in the side of Saul, the king. And Rizpah saw this. Saul is king not for very long before God rejects him. Disobedience. Just pure disobedience. Saul finds himself in another battle, again with the Philistines. And on this day, the odds are overwhelming to King Saul. And he sees that the battle is going against him, and this is an unwinnable battle for them. God's mad at Saul because Saul rejected him. And on this day, he sees that he is about to be defeated by the Philistine army. So he says to his armor bearer, he says, "Run me through with your sword. Run me through. Just kill me now so that some uncircumcised Philistine doesn't kill me." And that's kind of goes in my history instead. "You kill me. Run your sword right through me." And the armor bearer, "I ain't going to do that." So somewhere as the battle rages and the men are shouting and screaming and yelling and the clanking of armor and the galloping of horses, in the midst of all of this, Saul pulls his sword and lodges the handle, I would imagine, maybe between a couple of rocks. And he puts the point up to his chest and he runs himself through. Takes his life there on the battlefield. Somewhere maybe later that day, word gets to Rizpah. Don't know how to tell you this, but the king is dead. And in an instant, Rizpah might be thinking what you'd be thinking. Now what? Where do I go? What do I do? Where do I live? What's going to happen to me? Will I live ultimately as a single woman now because I'm in the king's court, the king's concubine, for the rest of my life? Think of the effect that it would have on her, that everything was going to change in her world, not by her own choosing, but by circumstances. Everything now had changed for her. And on one moment, she's living on Easy Street, a pampered woman in the court of King Saul. And now her life has totally changed. Well, for a time, we really don't know what happens to Rizpah. Like I said, there's only a couple of verses written about her. Saul is now dead. Saul is dead, and David becomes the next king. And David's the king of Israel, and he hadn't started his leadership too long when it just stopped raining. It didn't rain for 3 years. You would imagine how dry things would get if we didn't have rain for 3 years. When it doesn't rain, there's no wheat, there's no harvest, there's no food, there's no water left in the wells. So David gets on his knees and he says, God, this is obviously from you. You're trying to get our attention. Why are we suffering through this drought? What is it that has gone on? And God speaks to David and said, it's because of the sins of Saul. He took the life of Gibeonites. Now I'll explain that to you. Long before Saul ever became king. In fact, not long after the whole nation of Israel had come out of Egypt, and they wandered 40 years, and then they crossed the Jordan, and they came into the land that would eventually become what we know as of Israel today. There was a tribe of people there known as the Gibeonites. They weren't all that great of people, but nonetheless, an oath was made between Joshua and the Gibeonites, and the oath was this, that we would never kill you or annihilate you. It's an oath. It's a promise. God listens to the promises we make. Well, when King Saul became king, he was so zealous to establish his name and the power he had in Israel that at some battle, at some point, he took the lives of many of the Gibeonites. And God remembered that oath. And Saul knew about the oath. But he disregarded the oath. So he killed Gibeonites. And because of that, there was a curse over the land. So David says, well, what are we going to do to break the curse? We need rain. God, what are we going to do? And so David goes to the Gibeonites and he says, look, we have this curse over the land. We don't know how to break the curse. What can we do to break the curse? What can we do to make atonement, to make peace between us and you? And the Gibeonites said, well, really, I mean, this is kind of Saul's deal, but he's dead, so we really can't do that. We can't demand any money from you or the lives of you people. I don't know how much thought they gave to this. They finally said, well, we want the lives of 7 of Saul's sons. Give us 7 of his sons. Let us hang them. You understand, hanging in those days was to impale, just to impale the body. And that'll take care of things. David agreed. Knock at Rizpah's door one afternoon. Rizpah, I know you've been through a lot already. The death of your king, your husband. I need Araunah and Mephibosheth, along with 5 of their half-brothers. 5 brothers to another wife. And so David takes these 7 sons of Saul to a hill. I don't know all of the practices, but I would imagine there were some sort of stakes in the ground that were tall enough to impale a body. Maybe the bodies were even disseminated, just cut apart. We don't really know the details. And there's where our story picks up, with Rizpah. In 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse number 10, Rizpah is there that day. And here's what it says. Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the mother of the 2 men, spread burlap on a rock, and she stayed there the entire harvest season. Now, let me explain to you a little bit. Burlap. Some of you might know it as a gunny sack. You can smell it if you've ever been around a gunny sack or burlap. It signifies mourning and death and loss. Mother was right there a little bit like Mary, the mother of Jesus, when he was crucified. There for the impaling of her 2 sons, her only 2 sons. And she spreads out the burlap on a rock. And she stays there for the entire harvest season. 3 months, maybe 6 months. We don't know the length of time that she was there, but it was a long time. And then not only that, but look at the rest of the verse that says this, that she prevented the scavenger birds from tearing at their bodies during the day, and she stopped the wild animals from eating them at night. Every day, every day, every day, every day, every night. Moms, you know what this is like, don't you? You know the sleeplessness of nights, don't you? You know the tireless work that goes on during the day. And so here's this mother during the day running back and forth, not only for her 2 sons, but the 7 that were there, scaring away the vultures, nearly getting to the end of one, and the vultures already landing at the other side, and running back again, and continuing this day and night. And then when the birds were gone, and to rest at the night, and she lays her head down on a rock to sleep somewhere, with one ear always attentive to the possibility of a wild animal is going to come and tear at their flesh. And she needs to stay there and scare them away with such tenacity. She does this day after day for a long, long time. And I did a little research, and a body in the open environments will skeletonize in about 30 days. So here's Rizpah in the midst of all of this, day after day. Now, I don't think Rizpah had an audience. I can about imagine the talk about Rizpah back in Jerusalem. Have you seen that crazy woman? She's out there on the hillside day after day, scaring away the birds. Tell you what, I don't think the elevator goes all the way to the top. I couldn't do what you're doing. I don't know. But news about what Rizpah had been doing got to the king, David. David was so stricken by what she had done. David goes to Jabesh Gilead. You've all been there. He goes to Jabesh Gilead, and there he gets the bones of the former king, King Saul, and King Saul's son Jonathan. They've been stolen, and you understand the Philistines, when they defeated, well, they saw King Saul was dead, and his son, they took him home like trophies and hung him up, and somebody finally came and got the bodies, and they buried the bones at Jabesh Gilead. And David goes to Jabesh Gilead, mounting his donkey and taking a ride, and bringing the bones back to Jerusalem, and burying the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the grave of Kish, who was the father of Saul. And he did that because he saw what Rizpah had done up on that hillside for all of those weeks. So moved by what she did that it moved him to do that. And if you read the story, when he buried the bones, then the rains came. Isn't it amazing how insignificant Rizpah's actions could be? They came, and the curse was lifted, and the land was blessed, and the people ate. You know, moms, let me just tell you something, not just to moms, but to all of you, that there are no insignificant actions, only people who feel insignificant while doing them. There's so much that we can do that just goes absolutely unnoticed. I would imagine for Rizpah, I would imagine that her beauty was weathered by the weather itself. That while the bones of her own sons were bleached beneath the sun, her skin became darkened and tanned in the sun. That her beauty began to fade. I would imagine that she had no audience. Nobody's out there applauding what she did. Nobody's helping her do what she's doing. She is simply out there by herself. All of her significance of fame and pampering and stature as the king's concubine was now gone. No status, no audience, no applause. But one thing that she had was character and integrity. What she did, though, she had an audience of the king who saw what she did, and her actions led to his actions, which led to the blessings of a nation. She also had the audience of God the Father. Rizpah got a verse in the Bible. It's more that can be said for me, I don't have any verses in the Bible. Rizpah did. It's amazing to me that Rizpah really is a picture of faithfulness when nobody might notice, but everybody benefits. Think about yourself, Mom. Faithfulness. The things that you do at home that nobody knows about, but your household benefits. Men, how many times are your wife up during the night taking care of children, and you wake up in the morning and stretch and say, oh man, I got such a good night's sleep. How about you, hon? She just wants to pop you one, right? Faithfulness to your children. And then there's Dad. He goes to work, and you have no idea what goes on in his day from the beginning of his day till it ends. But you know, don't you, Dad? You know, don't you, men? Nobody knows the struggles, the challenges that you face, but you alone. And you fight them alone. You fight that battle all day long, and nobody knows about the choices you made and the decisions you had to do and the weight of carrying the family and the home on your back. And you come home and sit in your chair, and your wife says, well, how was your day today? Good. Students, what about you? You know what, I just speak to our students for a moment. I can't imagine what it feels like to walk down the hallway of a public school. We try to be your cheerleaders on Sunday and on Wednesdays and tell you, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. And just feel so encouraged after a youth convention or after camps in the summertime. And then you walk back into reality again. I would imagine you're the best employee that your employer has. He doesn't know how faithful you are. There's so many times you could rip off the company, you could rip off the business. There's so many times you could leave early, you could punch, whatever the case is, you could take advantage of the company, but you don't. Nobody sees the extra work that you've done with the cleaning, with the stocking, with the repairing. Nobody sees what you have done in the background, have they? You know about it, but nobody else knows about it. You just wonder sometimes if anybody is watching, because you sure wish they would, because you'd like some recognition for it. You're the best volunteer. You're the best volunteer. It's an amazing volunteer. You're at church week after week after week. You're at the community week after week after week. There's so much that you do. Nobody's writing an article about you in the newspaper. Nobody's doing an interview with you. We don't bring you up here in front of the church on Sunday and say, so tell me, how many smelly diapers did you change in the nursery this year? We want to applaud that. We don't do much of that because we tend to reward performance more than we reward faithfulness in the culture that we live in. And so we can get real tired sometimes. But never underestimate what you're doing, because, again, Rizpah is the picture of faithfulness. When nobody notices, but everybody benefits. And oh, the value that you have in those moments. And there might only be one watching, but there only needs to be one watching. And that's our Heavenly Father. It's God. Because someday God will write about you in His book. Only one needs to be watching. I don't imagine that for Rizpah. I don't think Rizpah was invited to women's events to speak. I don't think Rizpah wrote any books. I don't think she had any articles in any publications in Charisma Today. I don't think she had any TV interviews or newspaper articles written about her. But the whole nation benefited from her. This wild, crazy woman up there on the hillside day after day. I don't imagine that nation stood in line thrilled to thank her. There was no medals, there was no speeches, there's no interviews. But because Rizpah did what Rizpah did, it rained. And people ate. And a nation was blessed. There's going to be so many times in Life Church when we wish somebody would notice what we do. Moms, oh moms, hats off to you. We celebrate moms today. Moms, nobody works as tirelessly as you do. Mom. The first time your child says, Mom, it's like, did you hear that? They said Bob. No, I'm pretty sure they said Bob. No, they said Mom, Mom. And then at some point in your life, you just hate the name. Mom, Mom. And you just pour into them. And men, you married this woman and she was just the picture of beauty at the front. And then she becomes a mother and you wonder, where'd that bony finger come from? I never saw that before. Mom. Moms, one day it's all worth it though. You pour yourself into your family and into your children. And they'll run down in front of a TV camera and they don't say, hi, Dad. They say, hi, Mom. Moms, you work so hard. Moms, you scan Facebook, don't you? You get on Facebook, and here's the thing about Facebook that's amazing to me. It's a little bit like television. It's a lot like television. It's an illusion because nobody is real on Facebook. All they do is celebrate the wins and the victories in their life, never their failures. And so we start to read through all of everybody's successes on Facebook, and we look at ourselves and go, I'm a failure. I'm sorry. I don't homeschool my children, and I didn't make their clothes for them, and I'm not totally organic, and I can't give them the best kind of food, and the house that they live in is not the kind of house that they live in, and my son and daughter's not a doctor and a lawyer, and we just kind of go on that whole thing. I'm telling you, if you're on Facebook, celebrate your failures sometimes, too. I mean, nobody goes on Facebook and says, what's really going on in their life? My son has turned his back on God. My daughter is pregnant, and she's not with any guys right now, and my son is failing chemistry class. You don't read that on Facebook, do you? Moms feel guilty when that happens. It's my fault. I'm responsible for all these things because that's a mother's heart. But it's not just a mom, it's all of our heart. We look at these things in life and think that we're to blame for all of this. Let me say this to you, and then we're almost done. We're going to pray. One good thing done once may never change anything. But one good thing done over and over and over and over again might very well change everything. That's called faithfulness. And that's exactly what Rizpah did up there on that hillside that time. She didn't scare away the birds once to show her love for her children. She did this relentlessly, tirelessly, day after day after day. And at what point did it all end? I don't know. But because of her actions, she influenced a king, and she fed a nation. You might think, what does my little bit of anything make a difference? At school, at youth group, in church, at home, at work? But you don't understand how much value and purpose and worth you have. Now let me say this to you. It's amazing that Rizpah stands before these corpses day after day after day, interceding really on their behalf while they are dying. And I think of what Jesus did for us, dead in our sins, and yet Jesus rallies to us to be there to help us, to cheer us on, and to keep us going. He stands in that place. That gives me hope.